If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, we have a very special guest. I'm proud to introduce award-winning author and retired CIA intelligence officer, Carmen Amato. Carmen has had a remarkable career in her service to America, and I'd like to highlight some of her accomplishments. You know, hearing that someone worked for the CIA automatically invokes the image of cloak and dagger kind of work. And yes, I mean spy work. While this may be technically correct, there is so much more to this profession. I know this firsthand, as during my career with the U.S. Secret Service, I had the privilege of working side by side with these professionals as we carried out our national security priorities around the world. One thing I can tell you is that the men and women of the CIA wake up every morning seeking to prevent threats and pursue initiatives that will better protect America. Throughout Carmen's 30-year career with the CIA, she dedicated herself to collecting foreign intelligence, producing analysis, and conducting covert operations as directed by the United States President. During her career with the CIA, Carmen was recognized for multiple innovations leading to enhanced U.S. intelligence capabilities and is the recipient of two of the agency's highest awards, the National Intelligence Award and the Career Intelligence Medal. In terms of her career as an author, she is known around the world for her award-winning detective Emilia Cruz police series. This has won the Poison Cup Award for Outstanding Series from Crime Masters of America in both 2019 and 2020. Carmen's work has also been optioned for a potential television series. Now that's exciting. Carmen, your background is remarkable. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Arnette. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
That's wonderful. You know, as you know, S2 Verify seeks to provide background screening insights crucial to helping our clients manage insider risk, threats, and vulnerabilities. It's not lost on me that in your career with the CIA, you had a very similar mission in preventing risk, threats, and vulnerabilities for the United States. Is there anything you can share with our audience about the nature of this work and how you approach that on a day-to-day basis?
I would say that over the course of 30 years, I actually went around the globe twice. At last count, I've been to about 25 countries, and I encountered some form of deception everywhere I went, which should really be no surprise. The bottom line is that first as an intel officer, now as a mystery officer, I've spent a lot of time thinking about lying and deception. And what really piques my interest is not so much motive, because that's usually easy enough to divine. It's the mechanics of lying. It's the mechanics of deception that really become the meat and potatoes of an intel officer's career in many cases. For me, a lot of my positions were technical adjacent, and we used a lot of technical means to ferret out the mechanics of deception. So what makes a lie stick? What makes it believable? What behaviors are regarded deceptive? And are our notions of deception changing? And especially for the workforce, are we becoming more comfortable with deception?
Yeah, you know, that has so much in common, if you truly think about it, with HR teams and recruiting officials today, whether they're in the government sector or private sector. And there's a great similarities in what they're trying to determine for who's going to make the best applicant.
Absolutely. I was a hiring manager for the agency, and we had very clear guidelines of what we were looking for when we were hiring and what were red flags. So that whole notion of interviewing and assessing applicants, you can't just rely on the qualification. It's
Right.
got to be a good fit for the culture.
You know, are there any telltale signs that you might be able to share with our audience for an individual in a position of HR today of what they might be looking for? Are there behaviors or are there indications that kind of help you in that process?
We always were looking for, as I said, first the qualifications that got the applicant through the door. And then you're looking for the culture fit, especially with the agency. What were their real life experiences? Were they mature? Were they self-aware? Were they flexible? Were they a continuous learner? Hiring the mid-career officer was especially challenging because you wanted those qualifications, but they wanted the work unit they were coming into kind of to be shaped to their previous experience. And frankly, working at the CIA is not going to be like anyone else's previous experience. In some ways, the CIA is a very level playing field. For example, a colleague once complained that they weren't being addressed as doctor. The agency does not do that. You might have a PhD, but your annual evaluation is not going to call you Dr. So-and-so. And so those things were difficult. And sometimes folks would be dishonest, shall we say, in their application process for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Either they're lying to hide something they would assume would nix their application. So they're basically giving you a lie of omission. They're hiding a personal agenda. I saw candidates who wanted to spread a particular religious or political message and thought the CIA would be the place to do it. There were those who were actively terrorists trying to get in to sabotage the government. Some just wanted to see what they could get away with. And some enhanced their resume so that they would be entering with, shall we say, a higher social status than they might otherwise be. It might not always be an additional income that they would ask for a higher salary. They were looking for a status situation, which I found very fascinating. Right now, one thing that I find interesting is that applicants are massaging their qualifications or resume to meet the terminology used in the job application or the job notice, thinking that that will help them get through the AI or the technology that's doing the scanning, so that they might not actively be lying, but their resume also looks a little different than what they would had they not been trying to game the AI.
You know, that kind of it fits in nicely here with, you know, not long ago, CNBC carried a little report that suggested that 78% of job seekers admit that they're willing to lie in the application process. And that kind of lines up to a little bit about what you were just talking about. And then what your experience in the intelligence community of assessing individuals. You know, is there anything that you could suggest to HR teams that are looking to give their company a competitive advantage in this recruiting and hiring phase, and that any one or two little items you might suggest to them?
we always found that the communications plan was key. It was key for those of us who were on the hiring side, because you can imagine this was a very large organization. We were hiring for many different skills and qualifications. But we all had to present the same agency-centric face to the outward community that's looking to come in, and to universities who might be willing to host recruiters, other businesses that we want to partner with to have scholarships and apprentice type programs. So we had to have a good, solid communications plan within the agency, but the communications plan also had to extend to how we dealt with the group of people applying, so that we got the right candidates.
Yeah.
And I think that's a tough thing to constantly be working at, to constantly have a strong communications plan in place. We, within that communications plan, knew what were the red flags, what was going to be just a stopper for a candidate, even though they might have great qualifications, what might they do or how they presented themselves, that application is not going to go any further. So we all had a good notion of what that was. And I think that's important for an HR team, to have that good communication, to have those guidelines, to make it crystal clear.
Yeah.
But part of that communications plan has to be outward to the candidate too.
Yeah.
We lost candidates, as you can imagine, in a more than a year-long hiring process. So somebody might, have put their application in, they don't actually come on board until 12, 14 months later. And having someone who is their real point of contact in the process helped fewer desirable candidates drop out.
Yeah. I think in the hiring process, the face-to-face interview provides the company a really good benefit of seeing how the person carries themselves and communicate. And over the years, I think individuals have heard from the psychology field that there is a indication that someone that looks up to the left and looks up to the right is telling you something. Did you ever come across that? And can you
I have. There's a lot of these, micro movements that people do in these face-to-face interviews. That business of the eyes, and I'm lying if I look left, or
right.
telling the truth if I look right. I don't remember exactly what that is. Generally, if you are looking, and of course at the agency, your default is suspicion in just about any situation. If someone, for example, they're deflecting an answer, they don't want to deal with it. They kind of bunt it away, or they answer something else that you didn't ask. That's a red flag. If they are very defensive, and I have had interviews with somebody, and basically you ask them a innocuous question and they don't want to answer it. Not why they came, they didn't think they have to. Often that has to do with drug use, which is, that was a major disqualifier. Or they're dissembling and they cannot keep their story straight.
Yeah.
And that happens, unfortunately, more than you like. And the way to get around that was to have 2 interviews with the person, try to nail down the story in chronological order, and then the next person who talks to them takes it in reverse chronological order.
That kind of fits right in with the question I was going to ask about other government practices that are taking place that maybe the private sector should consider. And that sounds like a great one right there, which is having the multiple interviewers and taking the approach you just talked about.
You do have to have the infrastructure to do it. You do have to have people who can speak to that candidate, put them at their ease. One thing that I think the agency did very well, considering that the private sector is going to be much more nimble. You don't have the slow speed and the multiple layers probably that I was accustomed to dealing with as an agency hiring manager. But I think the agency did a good job in these multiple interviews looking for experiential discussions, asking experiential questions. And the one that I think almost everyone always asked was to have the candidate describe a time when they were in a conflict situation. How did they deal with it, and what did they learn from it? And if they said, "Oh, I get along with everyone. I've never been in a conflict situation," which some will. Then it's either they were in a conflict situation, it's the only one they can think of at the moment, and they did not come out of it well, so they don't want to talk about it. Or they're nervous and they can't think of anything, but that's pretty rare. The third case, and I have seen this, is they lacked such self-awareness, they didn't know they had been in a conflict situation and obviously hadn't learned anything from it. And that was always difficult. But that one question really helped to let a candidate describe themselves in a kind of a helicopter view. And you could really tell if they were going to fit with your company culture, with our company culture, and how they were going to approach working relationships. One of my best hires turned out to be a fellow who, when I asked him that question, told me about being a residential assistant, an RA in a dormitory in college. And the night that 2 different students suffered alcohol poisoning, and he was the only person there to deal with it. And it was just a really terrific insight into how he thought and how he would be able to deal with a high pressure job, which he did get.
Great. Over the last year, there's many employers have been discussing the difficulty they're having in hiring enough personnel. Do you have any thoughts in this space? I mean, any suggestions on how to encourage people to get back to work, given your extensive experience in recruiting for the government? Any thoughts on that?
I think one of the things we did well at one point, looking for hard target languages, is offer a bounty to those current employees who could bring in, you've got a strong employee, who are their peers, who are their connections, leverage that. And think about your current employees more like customers. You have a customer, you're going to offer them some incentive, something extra to come in and shop at your store or whatever. And so you knew those were strong employees. Who did they know who was potentially a peer? Yet, I wouldn't advise paying that bounty to the employee who brings in somebody that minute. Make sure that new employee sticks for a couple of months, and then your employee gets the bounty. So I would say leverage your current high performing employees as best you can. I'm wondering to what extent the gig economy is impacting current hiring in companies. I saw a long thread on a LinkedIn post just talking about this, how difficult it is to get new employees in the door. And the response surprised me. It made me think that people are less willing to accept an old paradigm of work in a fixed location for a demanding boss who may or may not be friendly or have a lot of social skills. So that it was flexibility and relationships that were turning people off into like the traditional workforce.
Yeah. I think that's so true. It's, there's a workforce today that truly is looking for opportunities and options in the work environment and how they approach it. What I'd like to do right now, Carmen, if you don't mind, is could you talk a little bit about how you draw upon your experiences in the CIA for your novels? You're writing about law enforcement and crime, but you do so in a different context from the work you did in the CIA. But I do know that there's a correlation there. Anything you want to share with us on that?
Well, I think the correlation is approaching crime, whether it's fictional or related to intelligence, with a healthy dose of suspicion. And that is definitely one of the hallmarks, I think, of the intelligence officer. You're assuming a negative. And with the Detective Amelia Cruz series, she's the first female police detective in Acapulco. That's her default. So she is expecting a bad thing to happen. She's ready for a bad thing to happen, even in a situation where you might not necessarily, if you're a lay person, shall we say, have that approach.
Yeah.
So I have written a few of my own experiences into the books.
That's wonderful. Carmen, thank you so much for your insights today. You've definitely brought in a unique perspective to this topic of hiring and managing the risk, presented by insiders. And as we close out our conversation today, I'm wondering if you're working on any new creative projects that you could potentially share with our audience and give us a little insight. Are you working on a new book now, or you have any other projects underway?
I am working on a new book. In addition to the Detective Amelia Cruz series, I've started a historical series based on the stories that my grandfather told when he was a deputy sheriff of Oneida County during Prohibition. So kind of taking that healthy dose of skepticism that I write with and applying it to a fictional town in upstate New York in 1926. One of my other projects is, and that'll be through 2023, is a blog series on lying and deception and how our notions of deception have changed
that's
over the years.
That's great. And please tell our audience where we can find more about you and about the books that you have that are already published and those that are coming out. What's the best location? What's that?
Yeah, you can check out my website at carmenamato.net for both the Detective Amelia Cruz series and the Galliano Club series, as well as 2 standalones and the blog, in which I've also written some stories related to my agency career. The ebooks are available on Kindle, and the print books are available everywhere where you would buy books.
That's wonderful. Carmen, thank you again for joining us. And thanks to all of you listening, watching, or reading. Please join me next week when HR and recruiting industry expert William Tincup joins me. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.